Let's talk about Jane Austen July. I am having such a wonderful time diving into the world that is Jane Austen. I have read most of the shorter works I wanted to read for it, and I'm currently reading the two longer books. Let's look at my TBR for Jane Austen July, which I did discuss with you 2 videos ago. For the first prompt, I'm reading Persuasion. For the second prompt, I'm reading The Watsons by Jane Austen. Then for the non-fiction, I'm reading Jane Austen's Bookshelf. For the adaptation, I read The Unlikely Pursuit of Mary Bennet. For a contemporary of Jane Austen, I read Mary Shelley's Matilda, although she wrote it a few years after Jane Austen died. It technically doesn't count, but Mary Shelley was a contemporary of Jane Austen's for most of her life at least, so I think I'm gonna count it because it's gonna be a fun book to talk about. I'm reading Persuasion, which I am reading for the third time, and finally I'm really letting it soak in, because the first time I read it the translation, the second time I listened to an audiobook, and right now I'm reading the original on my Kindle with the open dyslexia font, and I'm just reading it very slowly. I am now 3 chapters in, and I'm getting so much more out of it just by tapping my Kindle and translating certain words, but also looking certain words up, which gives so much context, especially in Jane Austen's and Eliot's father, so we follow our main character and Eliot. Although, should I explain plots of Jane Austen books? Probably not. If you're watching a Jane Austen video, I'm sure you know what Persuasion is about. In the first chapter, her father reads a book all about the history of barons and baronets, which has a specific word which I have forgotten, but I didn't know what that word meant. On my first and second read, I didn't really know what he was reading, but it gives so much context to his character and how much he cares about class and not at all about money and about practicality. Like, practicality is his enemy. It's so important for his character and also for how the plot is driven forward. So just knowing what that word meant gave me a new perspective on the book, or a new starting point for my reading experience of the first few chapters. I'm really loving the sarcastic tone of how the older sister and their father are described. Like I said, I'm only 3 chapters in, but I'm already feeling like this could be my best read of Persuasion. For the second prompt, I read The Watsons, which is an early unfinished novel by Austen, which no one really knows why she didn't continue it. It's not like Sanditon where she wasn't able to continue it, but this was just a novel that she started and let rest. But I found it really interesting, and I saw a few hints of like later novels, especially character-wise. So we have these 2 sisters. One of them is called Emma, but she's not like Jane Austen's Emma at all. These 2 sisters are very different, are quite interesting characters. There's a big age gap between them, and then we follow a Wentworth type character, or Wickham type character, I'm sorry. Got them confused, should not get those 2 confused. We follow a Wickham-like character who the first sister is clearly kind of in love with, but he's interested in a younger sister, and then there's a lot of tension between that. And a great starting off point with exploring how we have a different kind of character. I feel like the Emma in the Watsons is more Fanny, like Mansfield Park, but maybe I'm wrong, because you just get a few chapters, but that's the sense I got, and we'll be interested to see how a character like that would respond to Wickham. The way that Austen wanted to finish the novel, which is described, because apparently she described it to Cassandra, is interesting. Of course, I will not tell you, because if you want to read those first few chapters for yourself, I do think they're very good, but it is a bit, of course, unsatisfying. It feels like just reading some bonus material of one of your favorite authors. It's very well written, but yeah, you don't get a whole story, of course. Ooh, and then we're gonna talk about a book I was really curious about. This is a new release. It's called The Unlikely Pursuit of Mary Bennet, and this is a great sapphic retelling of Pride and Prejudice. I was, of course, a little bit apprehensive because it's about Mary Bennet and about Charlotte Lucas, and there are so many different versions that authors have written what happens after Pride and Prejudice, and some I like more than others, and my favorite is the other Bennet sister, and this definitely has a very different view of Mary Bennet, which is totally okay, because Mary Bennet isn't really a well-rounded character in Pride and Prejudice. She's not really supposed to be, that's not why she's there, but this is definitely a more modern, out-of-the-box take on Mary Bennet, where she, after Pride and Prejudice, she leaves off and she really leans into this intellectual part of herself. And I think the awkwardness and the single-mindedness that the other Bennet sister really uses for Mary Bennet's character is seen in this book as a youthful ignorance. She becomes much more of a social person who is really different from her sister. So she really grows into such a different woman than a lot of other adaptations would have her be. And then Charlotte Lucas is who we expect to be, but she has been struggling with this secret, and that, of course, or struggling with this secret. It's not a secret because she doesn't know it herself, but she's been struggling with these feelings that she feels attracted towards her friends or towards women, some of her friends, in a way that she feels is wrong or that she doesn't really understand. And she has never felt that kind of romantic or sexual love for Mr. Collins, which she thought was normal because that's not why she married him. And she was like, okay, fine, this is what it is, it's okay. But then after Mr. Collins dies, which is very graphically described, so quite content warnings for especially grief and death in this book, I found it quite intense. I mean, well done, but I found it intense to read because she's of course quite lonely, and she is once again destitute because Mr. Collins did not have a lot of money or something to leave her at all, because in this version Mr. Bennet is still alive, so although she would not have inherited it either way. So yeah, she is not in a good place, and then the Bennet sisters want to support her, and Mary Bennet visits her, and then things start blooming in a very beautiful way. So while this book I think is partly a bit forgettable because it's so incredibly romance heavy, it's really not a historical fiction, although it is a historical fiction, but it's not the kind of historical fiction that you would expect from a Jane Austen adaptation. It's a romance, and it has all these romance tropes, and the plot is built as a romance, and therefore I think it can be a bit forgettable because for me personally, I just read, especially lately, a lot of romance novels. Certain plot points of this book I just forgot, but the characters are lovely. I love the way we meet Charlotte Lucas and Mary Bennet. Is it necessarily a Pride and Prejudice adaptation? I felt like these two characters could have existed outside of the Pride and Prejudice sphere and could have just been a sapphic historical fiction without the Pride and Prejudice part. But that being said, I don't feel like at any point Pride and Prejudice characters were butchered in this book because it is focused on these side characters that don't very heavily feature in Pride and Prejudice. I think it's still done with so much kindness and love to the original work. For example, another bigger character in this book is it Anne de Burgh? I think so. It's the daughter of Lady de Burgh. She also has a bigger part in this book, but again, she doesn't in Pride and Prejudice, so the alterations to her character, or I would more say the add-on to her character, was quite convincing and very okay to read. I really enjoyed this. Like, it's an amazing sapphic romance that just really leans into all the space that it wants to take. It is, I think, true to what a historical relationship will be like. It is modern because we are a modern reader, but very Regency historical in a realistic way, but again still so loving and taking up space and all those wonderful terms you can think of. I really felt in this book. I will talk to you about the nonfiction in a little bit at the end of this video, but then we get to the whole Matilda of it all. Mary Shelley, oh my lord, honey, are you okay? This novella is one that I had seen other people read, so I felt like, okay, I've read Frankenstein, this will be a good next thing to read. And then I read the description. So this book is about a young woman whose parents, we follow her parents first. Parents get married very young, they've known each other through childhood, and then after her birth, her mother dies and her father grieves very, very deeply, and she doesn't see her father until she's an adult again, because she's raised by her aunt. And then her father gets her and her mother confused, and you can take all that you want from that. People call this autobiographical because Mary Shelley lost her mother, Mary Wollstonecraft, incredibly young. It was, I think, a few weeks after she was born. But I don't think the father-daughter relationship is at all real or autobiographical, like not even close, because her father married her stepmother, I think, quite soon after she was born, although I should fact check that. But she did have a stepmother, so it's not like her father clung to the memory of her mother in the same way, and the relationship between her parents wasn't at all like the parents in a novella. because her parents had both had relationships, were much older when they met. She also had already an older sister from her mother's side. People calling this autobiographical, I think, is doing a disservice to first what Mary Shelley can write, because I found it very convincing in how difficult it was for both the father and the daughter to be in a situation like that, and how nauseating and wrong it felt. And at the same time, I think Mary Shelley's obsession, both morbid and sexual, with death really shine through in this. Death and sex come very close for Mary Shelley in Frankenstein as well, and again in this book too, that it's always at the edge of danger, at the edge of what is acceptable, and where in Frankenstein we find that exploration more comfortable because it's about science, it's about humanity and philosophy and intellectualism. When it's about sex, it's so much more awkward, especially these kind of attractions are so much more uncomfortable, especially for a modern reader to read about. But I really felt for Matilda, because she is an interesting character. Maybe Matilda's experience of love and longing and death was close to Mary Shelley's own. The writing was a little bit too purple prose for me, which I usually can get over quite easy, especially in classics. But like the romanticism in this book was a bit too heavy for me. There's a big letter in the middle of the novella that I could have done without, but I understand how it's important for the plot and the characters. I do prefer more realist writing from this era, so I definitely prefer more rounded writing like Jane Austen's writing. Yeah, I would recommend reading this, even though it's absolutely bonkers. Doesn't have anything graphic if that is what you were worried about. But yeah, Matilda was a wild ride. Would recommend, but alter your expectations. Right, and then we have to talk about the nonfiction book that everyone is reading. And that is Jane Austen's Bookshelf by Rebecca Romney. And this book is so well written. I think it's going to be a 5-star. I am halfway through right now. So the premise of this book is that we have a rare bookseller who's Rebecca Romney. This is a nonfiction, by the way, I already said that. And she goes through the women writers that Jane Austen read. So she dissects Jane Austen's letters to see what kind of writers she wrote about. She looks in her novels like Northanger Abbey, what novels she mentions, and she looks at both the life and works of these authors, but also her own relationship to the topics that they write about. With some authors it's more interesting or more prominent than others. She's a rare bookseller, so we also go on a journey with her to find the perfect edition of that book, which I find so interesting. I don't think it's something I have a very personal interest in at the moment, but I could see myself getting incredibly fascinated with finding the perfect edition. Like maybe in my 40s that will be my new obsession. I can see it happening. It's not happening yet, but I find it fascinating to read about. I also really like that she read the actual works of the authors and that there were a few that she absolutely loved, and that she really discussed why certain authors are no longer part of the canon and how we judge women writers versus male writers and how we allow them a place in the canon, which is one of my passions to discover that and to talk about that and to evaluate the canon, to be part of it. And this book is just so valuable to me in that respect. I do have a few books from the authors that she mentioned that I still want to read, but it was really satisfying. And there's also one author that she has quite a personal connection with because of her upbringing. It's funny that she was like, okay, Jane Austen didn't really want to read her, but I'm gonna challenge myself. And then she was like, I don't really want to read it either. So we have one character that she has we have one author that she has a very difficult time liking and reading from, which I find very understandable, but I'm so happy that it's not just one big bowl of praise, but that we have a critical tone as well, and that it's such an honest exploration, because if you're gonna do something like that, you're gonna find works and authors you don't like. And I'm very happy that this is part of that book as well. Yesterday evening, I think I read 2 chapters. Right now, I have stopped on chapter 7, which is Elizabeth Ingbold, and I'm very excited to keep on reading. Yeah, I think this will be a 5-star because just the balance between all the elements I mentioned previously is so well written and it's never boring. And there was especially the life of one author I found so interesting, which was, yes, Charlotte Lennox or Charlotte Smith. Yeah, I think it was Charlotte Smith, whom I've never heard about. I did know Charlotte Lennox, but not Charlotte Smith. Also a lot about some women being, and especially men also, being able to write from an artistic perspective, I want to say, and then we have authors who wrote to make money, and how certain endings of books or how thick volumes are is about money. And I found that so interesting, valuable thing to know, especially I think when you're reviewing classics, knowing that if you say, well, I didn't really like the ending was rushed, there's often more than just an artistic choice from an author to do that, which I'm sure there's a version of that with authors today, but it's of course not the periodicals and the volumes that we had back then. I think that's everything for Jane Austen July. I did have also 2 films I wanted to see. One French film, which I cannot find anywhere, I'm sure it's still in cinemas, that is called Jane Austen Wrecked My Life. It looks really fun. And another film is an adaptation of Persuasion, but of course I will watch that after I've reread the book. Let me know how your Jane Austen July is going. Oh, I did want to mention that I still have 2 Jane Austen July goodie bags available. There are only 2 left because one part of the goodie bag are items that I cannot reorder, so the 2 are really the last 2 ones that are available. They're both on Etsy at my site, and I will leave the links down below if you're interested and if you want to celebrate Jane Austen July with some goodies. Right, let me know what you're reading for Jane Austen July. I would love to hear it, and I will see you in my next video for my Women in Translation month, TBR. Doei!